I think we are off and running. Mary Ellen, you're the first in the room. Fantastic. Oh, followed by Pat and Alice, and I can't even name all the names now. Carla, welcome, welcome, welcome. I am here, as you can see, in the bulb section of Hyannis Country Garden today. And I am so pleased that you have chosen to join me, whether it is live on Facebook or here on our Zoom link. Welcome, welcome. Now, as many of you know, I always like it when you will type in chat, first of all, if this is your first happy hour, and you can type in the comment section if you are joining me on Facebook Live. But I love to know who's here for the first time. And if you're not that familiar with Zoom, the chat is at the bottom or side of your screen. There's a little speech bubble. You can click on that and you can type in that it is your first time here. And for those regulars, you know that I love to know what's in your glass. If you have a beverage with you, type that in as well. As I often say, it doesn't matter what you're drinking. What matters is that we are sitting here together. We are taking an hour to breathe, to focus on something life affirming, right? And I was lazy. I have a can of Spindrift soda. So that's as exotic as I get tonight, but I am hoping, oh, peanut butter whiskey. My goodness, I've never tried that. Chinese tea, that sounds delicious. So iced tea, wonderful. And so nice to hear from you that it is your first time. So once we have a minute under our belts here to allow people time to gather in and remember that this is happening, then I will do the presentation. And it is in chat where I take the questions after the presentation. So if you have your questions, something in mind, you want to ask, you can type it in anytime, or you can type it in as I come out of the presentation later, and we will take them from top to bottom in the order that they were typed in, all right? And if we get to 6 o'clock, which is dinner time, if we get to 6 o'clock and I have not gotten to all the questions, I promise you I save chat and I then put the questions and their answers up on the Hyannis Country Garden blog. So just know that you will get your questions answered. Oh, but my goodness, all of your beverages sound delicious. And I am so glad that you are with me. And we're taking a breath to do something fun together tonight. So let's get right into a talk of bulbs and garlic. I'm going to share my screen here. We're going to get this up on the air. We're going to share it. We're going to play the slideshow. And here we are. Together, we're talking and toasting to bulbs and garlic because it is bulb and garlic planting time. Mid-October into maybe the middle of November, ideal time for planting bulbs. All right. So I have a picture here of a tuliptini, and you might ask, what is a tuliptini? A tuliptini is the beverage of your choice in a martini glass, garnished with a tulip petal. Because did you know that tulip petals are edible? They are not only edible, they are delicious. Another reason to grow tulips. Okay, we plant bulbs in October for flowers from March until June. And we plant garlic in October in order to harvest it at the end of June or early July. Now, end of June, early July is the time we certainly harvest garlic on Cape Cod. If you live in other places that are warmer, it might be a little earlier. If you live in a place that's cooler, it might be a little later. But here on the Cape, my husband and I usually dig up the garlic sometime at the end of June. All right, and this is what we want, right? Look at the shrubs in this picture. They have no leaves on them, do they? So they haven't broken dormancy yet. This is a picture taken in probably late April, early May. Things are still breaking dormancy, but look at all the color in the garden with these bulbs. And that's why you want to plant some bulbs in October to have this in the spring when everything else is still bare sticks. Okay, let me just get the chat off of my, so let's go through a kind of a little quick timeline of the most common bulbs. The earliest bulbs here on the Cape Cod are the snowdrops in March, and they are sweet and they are delicate. And this picture, I have to tell you, was taken in Jonathan Shaw's garden in Sandwich. If you know of Jonathan, he is the snowdrop king of Cape Cod. He's a collector and an expert on snowdrops. And I was privileged to be in his garden one time to see his amazing flowering snowdrops in March. So if you want something sweet happening in March, get yourself some snowdrops. Now, next, of course, come the crocus, and they happen almost at the same time as the snowdrops, but kind of right on the heels of snowdrops here on the Cape. And the great thing about both snowdrops and crocus is that they multiply. I personally love my lawn where the snowdrops, where the crocus are planted because it's in bloom. This is not my lawn, by the way, this is along 6A, but you may have driven on 6A in March and noticed this yard with thousands of crocus that have naturalized over many, many years. You can have this too, right? By planting crocus in a lawn. Next are the hyacinths in early April. And whether you love how they smell or don't love how they smell, they are multiplying bulbs in the garden, quite hardy, come in several colors, and they are one of the earlier bulbs to flower. Next are the daffodils of all sizes. These happen to be a small daffodil that I pictured here, but of course they come in many sizes. All daffodils are in the Narcissus genus, okay? So they are all Narcissus, but the common name for them, particularly the yellow ones with the yellow trumpets, are daffodils. And we have daffodils in several colors, some of them very scented. And again, they are in flower before the foliage comes out on our shrubs. So we love that. Daffodils also multiply. So you want to plant those so in places where they can fill out and you can get some big clumps over time. In May, it's tulip time. We love tulips because they come in such bright colors. They are cheerful plants. You can cut them for indoor bouquets. They are beautiful. And tulips can be planted in the ground, certainly. But for those of you who coexist with your good friends and neighbors, the rabbits, you may want to plant your tulips in containers because the bunnies do love the tulip foliage and flowers, and deer as well. Now you can spray with deer or rabbit repellent like plant skid, but another way to grow those tulips is in containers. And I'm going to talk at the end of this presentation. I will tell you more about success with bulbs in containers. And finally, in June are the alliums. So look at this, bulbs in flower from March until June. And the alliums, they bloom, some of them in early June and some of them in mid-June, some of them even in late June. So all, through most of June, you have alliums in flower. Now, I want to give you right off the bat a little hint about alliums, all right? And that is that the foliage starts to decline as the plants are coming into bloom. And many people think that there's something wrong. Nothing wrong with that. That's just what alliums do. Knowing that, however, you will plant your alliums behind taller perennials so that you have your alliums here and they're declining, browning, not so attractive leaves are hidden by those perennials that are coming up. And one of the best perennials to plant in front of alliums is the nepeta. This is catmint, This happens to be Nepeta, Walker's Low. Walker's Low and Blue Wonder are quite showy, and you will have that in flower along with your alliums in June. Now, of course, there are many other bulbs, all right? And I'm only going to feature a couple more here because I want to feature particularly a couple that aren't that well known. And number one is Camassia. These are Camassia flowers as they are just starting to emerge. They are stylish from the get-go. The stems are kind of black. We've got these tall stems and they reveal the blue color of their buds gradually. This is one stylish bulb. It is also a native bulb. And there aren't that many bulbs that we plant for spring color that are natives. And Camassia is in flower in May, all right, on Cape Cod anyway. And it is kind of a purplish blue flower. I think they come in white too, but the traditional native ones are blue, and they can be planted in a wildflower meadow. They can be planted in your perennial garden. One of the great things about Camassia is very shortly after they flower, the foliage just disappears and goes dormant. So you can have these again in and among your perennials. I think they're particularly wonderful behind or between daylilies because they get about the same height as daylilies. But of course, when the Camassia are in flower, the daylilies aren't in bloom, they're just foliage. And so you've got the great blue flowers of the Camassia early in May, another great cut flower. Look for this. We've got bulbs for Camassia in stock. I checked today at Country Garden right now. And if you don't yet grow this native bulb, you should do it. You definitely should do it. Now, here's another one that isn't planted as frequently as it should be, Iris reticulata. This is almost blooming at the same time as the snowdrops, March. This is like one of the very first spring bulbs in my garden to bloom. It's also called netted iris. They are very short, close to the ground, about 6 inches tall. This is one that is growing in my garden, and I plant them in various places where there's nothing much happening in the spring. It's a perfect plant to put where you might have hostas coming up later, because this is there in March and it's gone by the time the hostas emerge. So netted iris, Iris reticulata, and it's blue. It's not lavender blue. It is blue, blue, blue. So you will like this, and it spreads. So, you know, again, you put a few in the ground, and before you know it, you know how time passes in the blink of an eye. Well, in the blink of an eye, you will have many more beautiful iris in March. Now, I want to highlight the tulips. You know, I saw that we had some tulip parrot mixture still at Country Garden. And that picture in my opening slide of the tulip teeny, that red and white striped fringed petal that was garnishing that beverage was one of these parrot tulips. And I love parrot tulips. They are just fun, fun tulips. There are double tulips and singles and short, medium, tall. Most of them are mid-season bloomers, but occasionally you find earlier and later. Check them out. The parrots are wonderful. They are ruffly. They are fun. And some of them have long stems and some short stems. And the long stems, of course, are great for cutting and bringing in for bouquets. Now let's talk about some planting tips for your bulbs, all right? Because the first thing to know is you plant a bulb pointy side up. And for most bulbs, that's easy to see. You can see these daffodils, they have pointy tips, right? So you put this up and the root side down. Easy to do, very easy to do. You don't have to dig a real wide hole. You can dig a narrow hole and drop the bulb in, the bulb will be fine. But what happens if you can't tell, right? Some bulbs are a little hard to tell what's up and what's down. Wood hyacinths, for example, hard to tell with that bulb. Well, if you can't tell what's the upside and the downside, you let the bulb figure it out for you, and you plant them on their side. They will rotate. They will start to grow roots out of the root end, start to grow out of, the top end. And because they sense gravity, they know which end to point up and which end to point down. So you can depend on them to help you out when it comes to which way to grow. Now, deeper isn't better, okay? And you will find to this day a lot of information about bulbs. I remember reading in some well-respected garden magazine, several years ago, that bulbs are better planted 9 inches down, right? 9 inches. Now, not only was that a big, deep hole to dig, took longer and everything, but actually the research showed that this is bad advice. And if you want to take a screenshot of this URL, it's a bit.ly bulb depth, to see the university research that was done on planting depth of bulbs. They did it at Cornell University. And we always should go with the science. You don't go with the anecdotal or rumor or those weirdo hacks that you see online on social media. They are often bad advice. But the universities that have done the research, that's what you look for. All right. And Cornell did the research about bulb depth. And what they found was that 3 inches is the good depth to plant bulbs down. Now that's 3 inches from the top of the bulb to the surface of the soil. If you are growing your bulbs at Cornell in northern New York, you might want to put a couple of inches of mulch on the top of that. But here on Cape Cod, if you are a Cape Cod gardener, you do not have to mulch your bulbs to protect them. Here's the great thing about bulbs, people. In October, when you plant them, when the soil is getting cooler, the temperatures are dropping, right? Those bulbs actually create their own antifreeze, so that then as it gets colder and if the ground freezes, they do not freeze. Amazing, right? Plants are amazing. Now, if you're planting a lot of bulbs, pick yourself up an auger. This fastens to any power drill, whether it's electric or cordless, right? You put this in your drill and you can drill a hole. Now, my husband happened to have a very, heavy duty, fancy schmancy power drill here. You don't have to have that. You can use any cordless drill that you have and put that auger in and drill holes. This was when we first moved into my gardens at Poison Ivy Acres. And the very first fall that we were here, one of the things that we did was put in many daffodil bulbs. And you can tell that my dog Riley was helping. Now, here's what you want to do. If you are putting down bulb tone, which is a fine idea when you plant bulbs, you want to scatter it over the entire area where you are planting bulbs. You don't want to throw it in the hole. Why? Well, because if you dig a hole and you throw that fertilizer down here in the bottom of the hole and put in the bulb's roots then start to grow. But the bulb's feeder roots very quickly go beyond that hole. And if all the fertilizer is there and the feeder roots, the vital part of them, is out here, you're not getting the fertilizer where the bulb's roots are. So what you want to do is put it over the whole area up on top, and then the nutrients feed from the top down, which is how nature feeds plants. Organic matter from the top down, right? Nature never digs holes and throws amendments into a hole. Nature puts organic matter on the surface of the soil. It decomposes and fertilizes plants from the top down. We should be taking a hint from Mother Nature. Now, in the future, after your bulbs are planted, you don't put the fertilizer down in the fall anymore. You can do that the first time you plant your bulbs, fine. But in the future, you will put down an organic fertilizer where the bulbs are coming up in March or April, all right? If you put it down in late March or early April, that organic fertilizer will be available to the plants in mid-May, when those plants are actively photosynthesizing in their leaves and building up strength in the bulb for the next year. Now, if you forget from year to year where you have bulbs planted, have you ever done this? Have you ever gone out to plant your tulips or your daffodils and you dug in and you dig into a clump of bulbs where you already have planted them? We've all done it. All right. But here's a little hint for how not to do that. And that is, you plant grape hyacinths, miscari, around where your tulips and daffodils or other bulbs, whatever bulbs you're putting in, plant grape hyacinths around them. Why? Because grape hyacinths put up foliage now in the fall. If you have grape hyacinths planted, you go out to your gardens right now, you will see green foliage coming up. And in fact, you see how this is taken in the spring and you see how this foliage is all brown on the ends? That's because it came up in the fall. And so this went through the winter and it's, winter warm, right? But if you have that grape hyacinth foliage coming up in the fall, you will know that, oh, I have daffodils planted behind these, right? So then you won't dig there to put in new daffodil bulbs. And look what you get in the spring. You get the beautiful blue grape hyacinths with the yellow daffodils, classic combination, or the grape hyacinths with your tulips, classic combination. And those grape hyacinths have also told you where you already have bulbs planted. Now, this is a hint if you don't want flopping daffodil foliage in June. My father-in-law used to braid his and tie it up with a twistum, which was bizarre. That's all I can say. And not that good for the foliage. But if you don't want to see flopping daffodil foliage in June, plant the daffodils in between perennials that are later to emerge. And one of the best combinations is daffodils and hosta. Because if you grow hosta, know they are later to break dormancy. They wait until the soil gets a little warmer than other perennials. And so they come up a little later. And by the time the hostas are emerging, the daffodils are in full bloom. And in fact, if you've got the daffodils in between hostas, the hostas even hold up daffodils with their, prone to flopping in the rain. And then as the daffodil foliage gets bigger and starts to flop, the hostas just cover it up. You don't have to cut the foliage down. You don't have to macrame it. You don't have to tie it up. You don't have to do anything to it. It's just you let nature take care of those daffodils among your perennials. And here are some daffodils with hackone grass, Hakona cloa aureola. This is the yellow, butter yellow hackone grass. One of my favorite ornamental grasses because it's low and it's colorful from April until, well, right now it's pretty darn gorgeous in my garden, about 20 inches tall and graceful, and it does beautifully in part sun, part shade. So plant daffodils in and among your hackone grass. Now, don't worry about bulbs in late winter or early spring in terms of the weather and the temperatures. I frequently see people who are worried that their bulbs are coming up in January and February, and they say, my bulbs are confused. Your bulbs are not confused, people. Your bulbs know what they're doing. Plants know what they're doing, all right? They do not work in their own, for their own destruction. They work in their own best interest, okay? So those bulbs that are shooting up in January, February, see those green tips? They are photosynthesizing. They are making energy. They are feeding that energy down into the bulb, into the roots. You do not have to worry that they are confused or, that maybe they've mistaken a few warm days for spring. They have not. They know what they're doing. Here you see all this ice, right? The ground is frozen and you see all the ice. Those daffodils are fine. Leave them alone. Don't cover them up. Don't stress about it. Know that nature takes care of her plants. And a little light snow in the spring isn't going to deter these plants at all. Now, if it was a really heavy snow, sure. If we had 10 inches of heavy, wet spring snow, I'd probably want to pick those tulips because they might break. But they're certainly not going to die from the snow. And a periodic snowfall happens in the spring in April, and we can just appreciate that combination of winter leaving and spring taking hold. Yes, indeed. So enjoy watching your bulbs mature too, because they are magic. Make it a point. And this, frankly, I would urge you to do for all your plants. Make it a point to, on at least a couple times a week, if not a daily basis, walk around your landscape and look closely at what your plants are doing. Look closely at what they're doing now. The seed pods, the coloring foliage, the gorgeous colors on the aging hydrangeas, and in the spring, look at what they're doing when they break dormancy, because magic happens. Look at this allium coming out. It is breathtaking. So take advantage of, a frequent visit to the gardens. This is a tall allium relative that has white flowers, and it's like it comes into the garden in the spring and tosses its lingerie down to the ground. So watch them as they are not only breaking dormancy, but as they are aging. Those tulips, as they start to flop and fall, let them flop and fall. They are graceful dancers in your garden. And even as they lose their petals and start to go by, there is just such beauty there. And there was one year when I even got creative with the fact that my tulips had finished. All the petals had fallen down onto the deck, and I wasn't ready to replace the plants that were in this container with my summer annuals yet. So I tied little bows at the top of every tulip stem, and I celebrated the empty tulip stems for at least 2 weeks in the springtime. So do celebrate the process. You can expand the joy. And this is one thing about your bulbs, is that you will get pleasure out of them for 3 months or more, watching them break dormancy out of the ground, seeing the buds come up, spraying them maybe with rabbit repellent if they are your tulips in the ground. But other than that, and then when they bloom, and then when they start to go by, you will get months of pleasure. Now, let's talk a little bit about planting garlic, because this is time to plant garlic. I have not planted mine yet. Usually my husband and I put our garlic in, last week in March. I think probably we will, not March. Last week in October, I think we will put our garlic in next weekend is my thought. But first of all, you should buy your garlic as soon as possible, because it does tend to sell out. If you look for seed garlic in November, you will have a harder time to find it. I took this picture at Country Garden today, so I know we've got it, and we've got a few different varieties of it. And this is a head of garlic. Now, you do not plant the entire head of garlic. you separate the cloves. So you will buy the heads of garlic, but then before you plant them, you'll put on a pair of garden gloves and you'll, push the cloves aside so that you separate all the cloves out. Some will be quite large, some will be smaller. Don't worry about that. You want to plant them all right? And you can have, some varieties of garlic have small heads and some of them have larger heads. You can find some soft neck garlic, hard neck garlic. The difference is the hard neck garlic, that stem that goes down in the middle of the garlic head is hard on hard neck garlic. That's all it talks about. Now, if you happen to be gardening in Maine or Wisconsin, you probably want to plant hard neck garlic because it is hardier in colder climates. But here on Cape Cod, you can plant either one, hard neck or soft neck garlic. And I'd encourage you to experiment with several varieties. And if you particularly love the raw garlic flavor, well, then you might want to have several varieties. And in general, the smaller heads, particularly the ones that have the purplish wrappers on them, tend to be a stronger peppery garlic flavor than the bigger ones that have bigger cloves. They tend to be a little bit milder. In general, it's a general rule of thumb. So here is a head of garlic that I have taken the paper off so you can see those cloves. Now, you don't have to remove all the paper. Sometimes it helps if you just kind of nick the paper in the little indentation there in between the cloves in order to take your hands and push that first garlic clove out. Once you get one out, the rest are easy to do. And what we usually do is we, on a nice, pleasant October day, we will sit outside with the heads of garlic and we will push all the cloves and put them all in a container to plant. If you want to keep track of the different varieties, by all means, then separate them. We don't do that. We just, put them all together and grow them all together because we like them all. But if you want to keep track of which variety is which, then separate the cloves out, keep them separated, and then label the rows when you get them planted. You want to plant garlic 3 inches deep and 6 inches apart. So what we do is we take a hoe and we make a trench that's about 3 inches deep, and then we can go and place the garlic in. Again, pointy side up is a good thing, but if you don't know which side is pointy side, just lay it in the trench. The clove, the bulb will figure it out for you. And in fact, you can even have a 4-year-old kid help you plant garlic. Not a tricky thing to do. And this is, my grandson helped us a couple of years in October. Garlic is going to sprout in November. So you will see those little green shoots coming up in November on Cape Cod. That's okay. Don't worry about it. It's supposed to do that. Once again, remember that green shoot is photosynthesizing. It is building up energy to the root system to grow and get established, and eventually for it to start to make an entire head of garlic. You do not have to cover it with mulch to protect it on Cape Cod. Maybe if you're up in the northern Maine or Vermont, okay, put some chopped up leaves or pine needles. But on Cape Cod, not only do you not have to, but the fact that the shoot is photosynthesizing, if you cover it up, you're preventing that process from happening. So no mulch. In the 30 years that my husband and I have grown garlic on Cape Cod, we have never mulched our garlic to protect it. And this is what happens in the spring when it comes up. The shoots will kind of overwinter, and here's This shoot, you can see at the bottom of the page here, that's one that made it through the winter. The lower ones were the first, and they're a little brown on the tips, right? From going through the winter. That's okay, because then in the spring, they will start to grow. And this is how the garlic looks in May. So don't stress about it coming up in the fall. It's supposed to do that. Then you will dig up your garlic and you will harvest it at the end of June or early July. Here is our garlic that is tied up in the shed to cure. You will want to hang it like this in a shed or under cover somewhere. We did ours in the garage one year, and our entire garage and cars smelled like pizzeria. So now we do it in the garden shed with the door open. And it cures in there for a couple of weeks. And then you take and you cut the heads off and you store them as you choose to store them for the winter. Now, before we get to our questions, and anytime you want to start putting questions in, I will take them from top to bottom, as I told you. But let's talk a little bit about bulbs in containers, all right? Because I know some of you may want to plant your tulips in particular in large containers, just so that you can have tulips and you don't have to stress about the fact that the rabbits like the tulips as much as you do. Here's what you need for growing all bulbs, whether it's tulips or anything else, in a container. First of all, you want a large container. A 12-inch pot is not big enough. All right, you want a container that's at least 18 inches in diameter or bigger. You, of course, want a container that's not going to crack when it gets cold in the winter. So you want a plastic or wooden or metal or fiberglass container, not a ceramic or terracotta container. You want good drainage. Nothing in the bottom of the pot except soil, not rocks, not shards, not mulch. Only soil in the bottom of that pot, all right? And you want it to be new potting soil. This is one of the secrets to not having your bulbs turn into mush in a container. Because if it's used potting soil, then what happens is the soil has all those old roots from what you grew in it before, and the organic matter has started to break down. And when the organic matter starts to break down in a container, then the drainage isn't as good. So new potting soil, and new potting soil under the bulbs, and then you're going to put new potting soil on top. Now, keep in mind that if you have a large container, like this is one of my troughs on my back deck, if you have a large container and you're using that new soil, the next year, after those tulips are finished flowering, then you can pull the tulip bulbs out and you use that soil. That soil is perfectly, wonderful for your summer annual. So it's not that you have to start with new soil again in the spring. You use that soil in the spring. So number one, new soil in a big container, and you put your bulbs in and you top them with that new soil. And here we have all my tulip bulbs. You can crowd in the bulbs. And some years I use all tulips. Some years I use tulip and hyacinths. These are the brown are the tulips and the purple are hyacinths in here. Some years I put in daffodils and tulips and hyacinths, whatever strikes your fancy. You can mix them. You can, you'll see online some things about putting the bigger bulbs down below and the little bulbs on top. I say put them all at one layer, about 3 inches down. Don't worry about it. They work fine. And that's what you get, right, later on. And the lovely thing about the combination of tulips and hyacinths is the hyacinths start to bloom before the tulips are out. So you get an even longer time of display. And as you can see in this grouping, there are several tulips that are just beginning to flower. So, if you're putting them in a big container, look for some early to flower bulbs, some later to flower bulbs, mid-spring. and mix it up in the container. And the bulb packages will tell you, all right, when you come into the garden center and you read the package, it'll say mid-spring, late spring, early spring. It will tell you when they flower, so you'll be good to go that way. I have big boxes on my front porch that I put them in. They're not as large as those troughs, but they are still a fair size. They are still 12 inches, probably in depth, and 12 inches wide. And so new soil in those, there are drainage holes in the bottom. And as you can see, the tulips did just fine through the winter. They were out there. If you want, in such a box or a trough or a huge pot, you can stick in evergreens during the winter time, over the holidays and through January, and then pull those out later in February, so that in March, when these bulbs start to break dormancy, you can have the pleasure of watching them come into flower. All right, before I close this share out and get to our questions, I want to remind you, I am doing a pruning seminar through Zoom, just like this, on Sunday at 4 o'clock, 4 to 5:30. It is all about pruning. Be a barber, not a butcher. It is my most popular talk, has been for years at Country Garden. And that's because I want to demystify pruning for you. I want to give you a recipe so that you know how to approach any plant. Even if you're not sure what that plant is, you will be able to approach it. So you can go to the events page at hyanniscountrygarden.com, and you can sign up for the pruning seminar this Sunday at 4 o'clock. And by the way, as I get back to our, let me open the chat here, as I get back to our questions. By the way, you can also on that events page, sign up for the Halloween Pet Parade, which is not tomorrow, but the following week on Saturday. Come with your dog in costume, right? On a leash, of course. Come with your dog in costume. Wear a costume yourself if you want. There's a parade. There are going to be prizes for the best sport, the best matching costumes of pet and owner. And there's another one that I can't remember. There's goodie bags like pet swag galore. You're going to go with samples, go home with samples and treats for your dog, and a goodie bag. So all kinds of swag. It costs $10, but it is a fundraiser for the Samson Fund and for the Companion Animal Fund and for the MSPCA. So all of the money from the registrations is going to charity, and you can sign up for that again on the events page at Hyannis Country Garden. My body keeps disappearing today. I think my green screen is not working today. So, or maybe it's just we're getting close to Halloween. Okay, let's see. I have a question, but forgot to send it earlier. I have some beautiful tulip bulbs that I want to plant for next spring, but I don't want the rabbits, etc., to ruin them. Any suggestions how to plant in a pot? Well, we just went over that, didn't we? So good, Kathy, now you know. All right, just the top of my head. Yeah, I know I'm kind of disappearing, and it's either that I'm haunted or that my green screen isn't working. There you go. So no worries. It was so rainy this spring around July 4th, I harvested wet garlic, which I think is wrong. No, that's not wrong. July 4th is, that's usually when garlic is ready to be harvested. How you know when your garlic is ready to be harvested is when the tops of the foliage start to turn brown. And it was wetter this year. There's no doubt about it. We had many things that were problematic because it was so unrelentingly cloudy and damp this year. But I think you were fine harvesting on the 4th of July. We harvested our garlic out of our garden in late June. So unrelated to bulbs, kind of. My lilacs look like they do in March or April with small bulbs. One plant has lilac flowers. I'm terrified my lilacs will get frosted this winter and not bloom next spring. Is this because of the rain, a longer growing season, anything to do? First of all, Donna, do not be terrified. All right, do not be terrified. Uh, Plants know what they're doing. Now, some spring flowering shrubs, PJM rhododendrons, number one, right? Other rhodies, number two, occasional lilacs, will put out a few flowers at this time of year. And the reason is very simple. The hours of daylight are the same at this time of year as they are in the spring. Number two, usually at this time of year, the temperatures are very similar. You know, they're cooler at night, right? And we are also getting more rain and regular rain at this time of year, like we often do in the spring. So basically, the plant is putting out a few flowers, thinking that it's the percentage play, because it just might be spring. But don't worry, there are many other buds that lilac has. It's not going to open all of them, only a few. It will still bloom. Nothing that you need to do. Yes, that branch that has the flower on it, that's probably not going to bloom again, although sometimes they have other bulbs, other buds there that are not coming out. So don't worry about it. I think it's going to be fine. All right. Oh, so many first timers today. Thank you. Is anyone else seeing only half the screen? Is it, I'm hoping it's better. Did you see top to bottom of the screen during the slideshow? I hope so. But the reason I am disappearing is the green screen is not working well. So there you go. Are Camassia rabbit resistant? Yes, they are. And they are because I know that because I've got them growing in two places. I have where there are bunnies galore. I have never had to protect them. I have never had to, you know, spray them in any way. So go ahead and plant Camassia. I have never found a tulip or daffodil that blooms at the same time to complement Camassia. Suggestions? Yes. Look for the daffodil called Cheerfulness. That flowers at the same time as Camassia. Look for any tulip that is labeled as a late spring flowering tulip. I don't plant my tulips in with Camassias, but I have seen them planted, so I know they do exist. But look for them labeled late spring. Same with daffodils, and I happen to know the Cheerfulness narcissus, which have little smaller flowers that are fragrant. Those bloom at the same time as Camassia because I have them growing at the same place in my garden. Do chipmunks and squirrels eat Camassia and Iris reticulata bulbs? No. And in fact, Margaret, the chipmunks and squirrels usually don't eat your other bulbs as well, but they dig them up because they sense disturbed soil. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because people often have the experience of spending a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon putting in all those bulbs, and then 3 or 4 days later, you go out into the garden and they're all dug up, right? Well, they're dug up because the squirrel has sensed that the soil is disturbed, and so they dig down to see what's there. Like maybe another squirrel has buried a nut, or there might be a tasty grub there. And then, oh bother, it's just this bulb, and they toss the bulb away. So what you can do to prevent that is, as soon as you plant your bulbs, go out with a hose and water the soil in really well. And I know the weather is cool, right? And I know that, you know, rain might be forecast, but if you want the squirrels to leave them alone, water them in really well. If you want, you can also scatter some cayenne pepper on the surface of the soil. That repels squirrels very nicely. But it's the watering in, the settling of the soil, because think about it. You all have bulbs that you have planted in the past that are existing in the soil all the time, right? They've come back, daffodils that have come back a few years in a row, right? Do the squirrels go after those? No, they do not. They only go after the newly planted ones, because it's not that they're going after the bulbs. They're sensing disturbed soil and digging in there. So settle the soil in well with water and you will no longer have a problem. Okay, what's different about parrot tulips compared to regular tulips? The difference is the petals. The parrots have very crinkly edges and double petals, whereas the other tulips, like these pink ones behind me there, the other tulips have single tulips, and they're not, crinkly on the edges. So that's the difference. And sometimes they also have streaky colors in them, so that looks good as well. What about irises that are being replanted? Should the rhizomes be exposed? Elizabeth, that depends on what kind of iris you are planting. If you are planting Siberian iris, you want to bury the roots. But if you are planting the German iris or bearded iris, the ones that have it's actually a type of a stem that forms that tan colored rhizome, right? It's a modified stem. And that you do want to see on the surface of the soil, because if that is buried, the iris tends not to flower as well. So when you're replanting the bearded iris and you're replanting your German iris, have the surface of that showing by all means. Could you plant daffodils and tulips in between hydrangeas? Absolutely, except if your hydrangeas are in a lot of shade, you probably don't want the tulips there. Daffodils will do fine in shade because they will get sun, if they're in and among your blue hydrangeas, and your blue hydrangeas are under the, dappled shade of trees, the tree foliage has not come out when the daffodils are starting to put up their, their leaves. And so the daffodils still get sun. And by the time that the trees, particularly the oak trees, by the time they're fully leafed out, the daffodils will be finishing up their cycle anyway. So absolutely fine to put them with your hydrangeas. I'm having crocuses coming up. What's going on? Some bulbs, crocuses, but more commonly grape hyacinths, put up the foliage at this time of year. They know what they're doing. They are not confused. They know what they're doing, and they are putting up foliage, and they are photosynthesizing, and they will be creating energy for that bulb to, strengthen the root system and make more bulbs, make bigger bulbs. And so leave them alone and let them do their thing. They know what's going on. Do you harvest and save bulbs planted in containers? If you pull the bulbs out of a container, you don't want to save them. What you want to do is immediately plant them someplace in the soil and leave the foliage and stems on, plant them wherever you want them to grow in the future, let the foliage and, everything die back as it will. Water them, of course, well after you plant them. Try and get as many of the roots out with the bulb as possible. And it's pretty easy to do from a container. I don't do it with my tulips. Those troughs of tulips that I showed you, we throw those bulbs in the compost. And here's the truth about tulips. Tulips are not, most of them, bred to be long-term perennials. The species tulips, like see this box of the red ones behind me there? That's a species tulip. Those will come back for at least 5 or 6 years. But a lot of the tulips, particularly the fancier ones and the, pink ones and the different colored ones, they might come back a second year if you're lucky. And then after that, you'll get the foliage back and no flowers. And that's because they're just not bred for naturalizing. Most of the tulips that we have access to are from Holland that are actually bred for the cut flower industry, not necessarily for long-term survival in gardens. And so we toss the tulips into the compost area at my property. They often come up in the compost the next spring, and I use them then as cut flowers, right? And if they don't come up, that's fine too. So, do what you want in terms of that. If you have planted other bulbs in containers, by all means, plant them in the ground because they can come back year after year. Can I plant cloves of garlic from this year's harvest, or do I have to buy new seed garlic? As long as your garlic was healthy, as long as those bulbs are still firm, as long as those heads are still firm, absolutely use what you planted this year. Sometimes people's garlic, if they haven't stored it cool enough, starts to get soft. And if it gets soft, or if you open one and you see that that clove is brown, you probably want to buy seed garlic because you want it to be white and fresh and firm. All right, so check out what you've got. And many people do save from year to year. There are many people who save the biggest heads that they've grown for next year's crop, and then they cook with all the smaller ones. So we use so much garlic that we cook with it all. All right, how many cloves of garlic do you plant? Well, I'm married to a kind of a crazy Italian guy, and he loves his garlic and he loves his basil. And so we have 3 long rows of basil plants, and we have 5, 12-foot rows of garlic. So it depends on how much you want, how much garlic you use. What we do in this household is we save some of the garlic, which I'm, using fresh, but a lot of the garlic I roast in the summertime. We squeeze the roasted garlic out of the paper wrappers onto wax paper. We freeze the roasted garlic, and once it's frozen, put it in a plastic bag. And then all winter long, anytime I want garlic in anything I'm cooking, I take a handful of that roasted garlic and throw it in whatever dish I'm making. So that's how we use a lot of garlic, but it's up to you how much you grow. Are squirrels a problem with hanging drying garlic? No, they really don't like, the squirrels are not after the bulbs. That's what I'm telling you. The squirrels don't like the bulbs. The squirrels are sensing disturbed soil. They don't bother garlic. Should garlic trench have added compost? No, I think if you have routinely been amending your soil in your vegetable garden by putting compost on the surface, and that's how you should be amending any bed you're planting. Should never just amend a hole, never just amend a trench. Think about it. If you put compost in that trench, you put in the bulbs, and then the roots grow beyond that trench. So you should always be amending your beds on the surface of the soil by putting compost, and you only need an inch or so over the entire area. Then you can dig your trench, you put in your bulbs, you cover up the garlic. Some of the, the majority of that compost is still on the surface, and it amends from the top down. And in the next spring, if you want to use mulch to keep the weeds down, you put an inch of mulch on the inch or 2 of chopped up leaves or hay or pine needles, whatever you're using, right on top of that compost. You're constantly amending soil from the top down like nature does it. Okay, let's see. Since you do not need to mulch garlic, does that mean no red clover crop? Well, if you are putting in a red clover crop, that has to be dug in the spring. And you can't combine red clover with garlic because you can't turn the red clover in the spring if there's garlic growing there. So a cover crop, red clover is a cover crop like winter rye. It is not a winter protective mulch, okay? It is more of a green manure, and you don't plant that where you plant garlic. You plant that in places where you don't have garlic if you want a green manure cover crop. How deep should the container be? A container for bulbs should certainly be over 18 inches deep, and deeper than that is better. And we're almost going to run out of time here. So what I am going to do is I'm going to save my chat so that I can answer the rest of your questions on the Hyannis Country Garden blog. All right, because I know I've got at least 9 more questions. So I will, by all means, update the blog probably sometime on Sunday or Monday with all of the questions we didn't get to tonight. Remember to check out the events page at hyanniscountrygarden.com in order to see the registration for future Sunday seminars, as well as our pet costume parade that's coming up a week from Saturday. And thank you all for joining me, whether you were with me on Facebook or with me with the Zoom. I really appreciate being with you, and cheers. Have a wonderful weekend. And maybe I'll see some of you on Sunday. Take care. Bye-bye.